Now welcome in Andy Roddick alongside Lindsay and Paul. Andy, you faced Roger Federer 3 times in a final at Wimbledon. What was it like being on the other side of a net from Roger Federer, center court, in a final?
Depressing at times. When he's kind of firing on all cylinders, and obviously it was a great run in 2017 when we played. Actually played him 4 years in a row. So I played him semis and then, semis, final, and then another final later on. In his prime, though, he had the option of serving and volleying a lot more. He played great defense. He was able to keep that chip down and kind of get out of a tough situation anytime. I think in his prime, when he was maybe a step faster, he passed amazingly well, and I don't think that gets talked about enough because it took away kind of a desperation option of just kind of going like a full-on assault and being super aggressive. You felt like you had to make a decision, but none of which were a good one.
Andy, one of the things I always found interesting watching Roger on grass is you look at him taking time away, and when he returns, even against a great server like you, it's not the oppressive return style like a Novak, but it's the hockey goalie style. But it still kind of puts you in awkward positions. Did that kind of return style make it more difficult for you to react to?
Well, you're spot on, Paul. It was basically like a volume play. He was going to make a ton of returns. But the other thing, like when I was playing, when I was serving against guys and they were taking big cuts at returns, or at least trying to hit over every return, they were rarely going to kind of square it up perfectly. So I was going to win a bunch of the first serve points with Roger. He was able to, with very, very, very small movements, put the ball back in play. And once we were neutral, it was his advantage. So, there are probably better returners in the game against servers. I was a good server who maybe weren't as good a servers as I was. For me specifically, I didn't want the ball to get down. So he hit that little chip down on my backhand. I couldn't hit topspin. So we kind of played the same point over and over. But his ability to kind of accept my pace with very little movement and make a ton of returns was frustrating.
Well, we always say that Roger makes it look so easy out there. So maybe sometimes he doesn't get the credit of what a great tactician he is also, not only against you, when you saw him play against other players. Do you think that's an underrated part of his game, what he's trying to do with his shots to disrupt the rhythm of his opponent?
So I'll give a very specific story that kind of lends itself to your point. For a while, any time that I decided, and Paul probably knows this is going to laugh because I'm sure Roger talked to him about it when he was coaching him, but for a long time, whenever I would try to run around a second serve return against Roger, I would always pick the wrong time, and he would kind of pull the string and hit like a slice cut second serve. And so I guess I did something. I popped up like a quarter of a second earlier than I normally did just to accept a backhand return. And he knew that for 12 years and would just pull the string, and he would kind of keep his eyes on me for longer. He kind of has that thing where he's looking at the returner longer than most people do when they serve. And so I finally figured this out. Someone let it slip somewhere along the line. And the last couple of times I played him, I was just cranking second serve returns. And there was this moment where I got a hold of like 3 or 4 in Miami when I was playing terrible and he was still Roger, and I somehow won that match. But there was this look I remember like early on in the second set where he's going, "Oh, now." And I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you, it took me 12 years to figure it out.
Fool me once. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, though, about his serve, too, that I've found with the years I was with him, Andy, is even when I'm on the other side and he's practicing, he's one of those, a little bit like Pete, maybe not as much pace, but he can hit lots of different targets with similar ball tosses. So I found it difficult to read his serve as well. What did you see on the other side?
I would say he was, and I mean this in a positive way, because I think the person who's messed with their toss and pacing of their serve, they can play the kind of the hurry up, was Agassi was not an unbelievable server from just a pace and movement standpoint, but he pitched such a good ball game. I say Andre was almost like a Greg Maddux, whereas Pete was more powerful and had the placement also. I think Roger was almost a hybrid between the two. 12 or 13 years later and playing a bunch of times, he could hit. He wasn't scared to throw any serve in at any count. So I say, like, the greatest pitchers aren't scared to throw a curveball in a 3-2 count. Roger was the same way. He would throw in a 97-mile-an-hour kicker for a first serve just as easily as he would hit the big one out wide. And he didn't really have predictable habits. So that made it pretty frustrating. And he could move the second serve around the box too, short in the box, long in the box, hit it both ways. So what he didn't have in just natural pace, and he still hits a great serve. 125, 126 consistently, which if you're hitting your spots is plenty. But he was a great pitcher as far as just managing out, keeping you on edge, you not knowing what's coming, fast, slow, not having super obvious tendencies. It was annoying.
Changing gears here a little bit. Yesterday, the ATP and the WTA announced that they would freeze the rankings and they wouldn't count towards records or weeks at number one, weeks in the top 10. You got into a little Twitter discussion with Brad Gilbert about it. I'm just curious on your take and if you agreed with the decision.
Well, I actually don't think, and Brad's take was, listen, Novak's, he's in pole position. You can't take it away from what he's earned. And, if you walk it out, he's most likely going to do this. And I said, I agree with everything you're saying, Brad, except for the technicality of you have to play the matches to win, and you can't get credit for matches you don't play and matches that other people don't play. There's every chance that Novak could get hurt and Rafa could win a Master Series event, and then we're in the clay and he could run the table. So although you're probably right, it doesn't work with saying it's probably going to happen, so therefore we're going to give him credit, which could end up being an all-time record. It's terrible for Novak. It is. If I'm him, I'm so frustrated. I feel like something's been taken from me. I get it. It's justifiable, but you can't just make assumptions, therefore give credit for something that hasn't been played out.
Yeah, I just think I agree with you. I just think the what ifs, you want to make a decision like this where there's a least likely of a subjective evaluation coming into play. And that's kind of what it seems like they've come up with. Have you gone through any other permutations of it that make any sense to you?
No, I not specifically, and you'd have to think it out. I wouldn't mind. Maybe you give it back to Novak on the backside. Maybe if it's mathematically impossible for him to be overtaken in the next month, right? So if he loses, let's say if he would have lost Monte Carlo, whatever, and it was mathematically impossible for him to be passed, I'm happy with him getting that credit on the backside. But it has to be a mathematical certainty in my mind for him to get credit for those weeks under any circumstance. Meaning, if he doesn't play and Rafa wins everything or someone else wins everything, he would still be number one. I'm happy with him having credit for those weeks, but it's not just open-ended. You get credit for when people are off, when everyone's not playing.
And there's no perfect answer to this because you had players like Bianca Andreescu was not going to play Indian Wells. We knew that. Roger Federer wasn't going to play the clay. Now the points will stay there at this point because it's all frozen. So we'll see. I think it's the best that you can ask for right now.